Claudia is going to call home in about an hour, and her mother's en route, I think, to home, having been at the hospital with Jason, and will let us know what she finds out further. And will you be staying at the camp, or will you be going home, do you think? Haven't decided. Someone came up to me after the first session and said, we have to realize, and Mike, remind me, this session goes to 11:30, Richard? They told me that the nature of the economy today is that it takes, in many cases, it takes two salaries to provide what one salary in the 50s used to provide. Even up into the 60s and 70s, my dad in 1969 bought a farm in Vermont, bought a 70 or 80 acre farm, small farm, family farm, with it was an old farmhouse, but it was 2 stories with a dugout basement where we stored food on 80 or 70 or 80 acres, something like that. We had freshwater spring, several freshwater springs, in fact. We had a stream that came through our property that we could fish in. We had a cedar forest that we harvested some of the cedar and sold. I mean, what a wonderful blessing. He paid for that farm, or was paying for it, on one salary. With 4 kids, Mom was able to stay home, did not have to work all that time. She did stitch leather moccasins. There was a company that hired women to work at home. They would send her a big box and she would stitch them, and us kids would help. We thought it was fun, at least for a while. Then she would send it off. They'd send her another box. She did some work at home like that. But mostly what she did was, we raised a big garden, and she might not pick it. We might be out picking it, but she would be canning it and doing things like that, taking us kids to ball games. That was off a salary of a construction worker in the 1960s. Today, it takes 2 salaries to provide what my dad's one salary accomplished. How has that happened? There is a book called Shadow Men. Has anybody heard of that book, Shadow Men? Written by Dr. Anthony Napoleon. I will tell you, it is a very, very controversial book. And if you get the book, am I mentioning it here and say, does Warren believe everything he has in here? The answer is not necessarily yes, because there are some things in there that I do find a stretch. But he does talk about some economic things that have happened in the country, and explains some of the hardships. And he claims in there that some of the financial elite found it beneficial to widen the tax base by creating an economic system that required the wife to work and not stay at home, so that there was even more people they could tax. And whether that really got them that much more money in tax revenue, I don't know. But there is another man named Andrew Russo, R-U-S-S-O. He has done a number of controversial video documentaries, and he has one on YouTube. I don't remember the name of it, but it's actually where he is interviewed, and he, completely separate from the work of Anthony Napoleon, he documents what Anthony Napoleon said through personal conversations with some of the elite that he knew, that they were restructuring America's economic system that would completely change the social and familial networks in our country on the basis of their economic change. And it would undermine a Western Christian ethical system that had been developed over the last 1,000 years. They would do it through economics. And as a result of that, they would usher in a new age of feminism, where now women would be offended at the thought that they stay home with their children. They would be even offended at the thought of having children. Why have children? Just because I've got a body for it doesn't mean I have to have children. It doesn't mean I'm a woman just because I've got this body. And they would completely change the relationship between husbands and wives, where there would be a greater and enhanced sense of competition between them than there was before. That instead of seeing one as the provider and one as the nurturer, there would be a competition for who is going to be which. And there would be competition and fighting. There would be more divorces. There would be more breakup. And you don't have to preach atheism to an American society anymore. You just preach our rights. And that's how they're going to undermine what leading Christian thinkers have been working on for hundreds of years to develop, and that made us the country that we were in, say, 1950. That was done through economics, and then the education, if you want to call it, or the programming that followed to support that. Yes, sir, Jim.
I think there's another side to that, which may still be part of it, is just we've become so much more materialistic. I mean, if you look at what we have today compared to our parents or their parents, the homes we live in, the vehicles that we have, the toys that we have, and to have all of that, there's another reason that a lot of times both parents need to work, just to kind of keep up with the Joneses, so to speak.
Well, Jim makes an excellent point, and that is that part of the problem is our materialism, and that's exactly right. I remember my stories from my own parents talking about being excited about getting chocolate for Christmas when they were kids. And when I was a kid, there were chocolate cookies and my mother made these neat little chocolate, kind of fudge kind of chocolate with the white on top of it, whatever those are called. My wife makes them now too, I just can't think of the name of them, but I love them. But they were available beforehand. We were able to provide more. You're right, that has changed things. I remember when a man I forgot his name, but he went to the church with us in Cody, but he remembers when they were down to their last 3 shotgun shells. And when he went out to hunt one morning, his dad told him, "You better not miss." Because they didn't have food in the pantry, and this was during the Depression. They didn't have a backup plan. You had to use all 3 shells effectively. So we have changed today. We are more materialistic. And that, pardon? Shadow Men by Anthony Napoleon. And I will say I don't agree with everything in his book. You're going to read some far out things.
And the other one was Andrew Russo?
Andrew Russo, R-U-S-S-O, and he is on YouTube. And he talks about the changing economic status of women in society and how that happened. I will also say there's a book in the back up here. I forgot who has that book, The 12 Principles for Life by Jordan Peterson. Whose book is that? Hey, how you like that book? It's pretty good so far, isn't it? I've only read a short part of it. I bought one for me and one for my son. I have listened to him for hours of his stuff on YouTube. And he's a psychologist in Canada. He is not Christian based, but he has Christian principles in a lot of what he says. He thinks belief in God is valuable, even though he's not fully convinced there is one. He grew up in what would be the Church of England in Canada. Would that be, those of you that live in Canada, would that be the Church of Canada? Anglican. The Anglican Church. Okay, I think he grew up in Anglican. So he has Christian principles in him, even though he doesn't have the act of faith. And those principles come out in his writing and in his speaking. But he is very high power psychologist, extremely intelligent, extremely over the top intelligent. And you can tell that when he lectures. But he says because of his experience and his knowledge, he has a lot of high powered people come see him. And he had a woman about 30 years old, 6-figure income as a lawyer, come and want to talk to him. And he thought, well, what's her problem? She's got everything society says you need to have to be happy. And he says, tell me about yourself. I'm a lawyer. I'm rising in the firm. I make over 6 figures a year. My husband makes over 6 figures a year. I'm getting positioned to become a partner. He says, and why are you coming to see me? She says, because I want a baby. Okay, what's the problem? She says, the problem is you don't desire a baby in a firm like I'm working for. Your desire there is to make even more money, to get even higher, and not stay at home with a baby. He says, tell me more. She says, well, my husband and I are both fulfilling what we were told would be the dream life. We're making more money than we can possibly spend or that we have time to spend. We work 80 to 90 hours a week. We go to bed with our laptops, and before we kiss goodnight, we're on our laptops finishing up details from the day and getting ready for tomorrow. We get up at 5 o'clock. We fight an hour's worth of traffic. We're at work 12, 13, 14 hours. We rush home, throw something together to eat, and we're on our laptops all night. And she says, I'm asking myself, is this what life is about? Is this what I'll be doing at 35 and 40 and 45 and 50? I want a baby. He said, to heaven's sake, have a baby. She said, do you know what they'll think of me at work and what they'll say? That's not the culture I live in, and that's not the culture of many young professional women today. He says, leave work, have your baby. And he said there's a number of women in his practice that he encounters that are opting out of those high-power, high-paid jobs for 9 to 5 hour jobs so they can have a baby and stay at home, or at least in the evenings with them. Some are able to just stay home. And he says, what a shame in our society, Western civilization, that we've got to counsel young women, intelligent women. It is okay for you to have a baby. In fact, that, he would say nature, I would say that is what God has developed you for. There is no higher calling in life than to produce life. But all over Western civilization, we bought into some of the economic ideas of today. And in Germany today, so many women are waiting until they're 35 to get married because they're building their careers, that they're 35 when they get married, they're 38 when they want to have a baby, and then they decide, this is probably too late. And roughly 1/3, I think, of the women of Germany, German women, are not having babies. Or if they are, they're having one. It takes roughly 2.5 to grow the population. In Western civilization today, Europe, Germany, England, France, Sweden, the United States, Canada, Australia, white South Africa, we're averaging 1.9, which means we are not even growing. This is one of the, it's not the only place, but it's one of the places where Christianity has taken root and has been used as the springboard for mission into the world, and we're not even sustaining ourselves. And it's not just the baby rate, it's the entire view of what life is about. Economics, our position and place in society, power, position, prestige, possessions. Babies don't fit into that. Neither does necessarily Christ. That's one reason why I think Western civilization is struggling so much. We've lost the sense of who we are based on God's definition of who we are. And having more stuff ultimately is more important to many people than having a baby. And that's sad. So I appreciate Jordan Peterson, who is a psychologist, not coming from necessarily a Christian perspective, but telling this intelligent young woman, for heaven's sake, woman, go have your baby. Don't worry about what they're saying. That's the grandest thing you can do. And it may be him that I heard say, when you're 80 years old, and you're lying in your bed or sitting up in your bed, do you want to be surrounded by your financial portfolio, your savings account at First National, your investments at this particular institution, your IRA statements? Do you want them surrounding you in your bed and you go, oh, all these investments? Or do you want to have 3 children and 9 grandchildren surrounding your bed? And granted, there are some people who cannot have children. And blessed are they who adopt children. If you realize young enough and you can get started, we have adopted people in my family. And if you ask anybody, they're not an adopted relative, they are family. And I know there's problems there too, but there's problems when you have your own kids, aren't there? But who wants to quit having them? You know, the greatest blessings in life come at great risk. I remember reading, I was in college and I was visiting in a Christian home and reading one of the women's magazines of the day. Yes, I will admit that I only read them on occasion when I'm at somebody else's house. I don't order, Ladies' Home Journal or whatever for myself. Sometimes I will read a People magazine as well, but it's when I'm in the doctor's office and I'm looking at reading a commentary on Micah, or there's a picture of Tom Cruise on People magazine, and sometimes I will open this and read it. Yes. But I remember reading this woman's magazine, and it talked about reasons why women should put off getting married and getting their degrees and starting their careers, and they can realize now financial independence, and they don't need a husband. If they want to have one, but you don't need one. And if he turns out to be this kind of a guy and you divorce him, you're all ready to launch off on your own and you don't need him. And I remember reading that thinking, do I want to risk marrying a woman that read this article and thinks that I'm as expendable as a Kleenex? And that really made me, do I want to do this? And then I met Cheryl and I said, there's no risk. She didn't read this article. Okay? Thank heavens for Christian families that manage to keep that garbage out of the minds of our children. And they still grow up with a view of, God made me a man, and it's a glorious thing. God made me a woman, and it's a glorious thing. Do you realize that it's not the man alone who bears the image of God? It's the woman as well. It's not the woman alone who bears the image of God. It's the man as well. And it's in our completeness that we bear the image of God. God by himself could produce life. By myself, I cannot. By herself, my wife could not. But when we come together as a husband and wife as God planned, guess what we produced? Life 3 times. We are image bearers of God when we come together as one. And to think that you could alter that plan in any way, and for a woman who listens to some of the stuff in the world today and what society says about her, and this poor young woman that's 30 years old and making $100,000 at a law firm in Canada and is ashamed to say she wants to have a baby. Okay, this is what happens when you get 59 and you start off on a tangent. You forget where you were going with it. Oh, this is where it is. I don't want my wife thinking she can cut and split firewood as well as I can. I don't need a wife to do, in Wyoming we used all wood and she did help build the fire. But I went out, she did go out sometimes with me when we went on the mountain, and I would cut and she would help load. But I don't need her to do that all the time to prove that she can haul firewood just as well as I can. I don't need her to be the man. I am perfectly willing to be the man. I want a woman to function like Cheryl has functioned all these years. That's the greatest blessing to my life. So for a woman to think that she's got to be able to compete with a man, and I'll never forget seeing a teenage girl and a young woman in one of the churches where I preached at, I won't mention where. It wasn't Ulysses, for those that are here from Ulysses. But as we were rearranging the furniture, this teenage girl said, should we get a man to help us with this bench? And this woman in her 20s says, we do not need men. And she didn't say it with a smile. And I felt for that woman, and I still do. I don't remember the teenage girl she said it to, but I hope the message didn't get in her head. We don't need men. And that attitude has transferred into a number of difficulties in relationships with men, especially those in leadership, even in churches, in places of work. Yes, we do need men. And yes, we do need women. And blessed are the men who know their men and the women who know their women. And in this day and age of gender fluidity, here's what I really appreciate about, and you folks from Canada, you really need to look into this guy. No, I don't endorse everything he says. But they're trying to push this pronoun law where you've got to use, 26 different pronouns? Are you familiar with that? He is the one leading the fight against that. They said, University of Toronto, I think it is, you're going to use these pronouns. He said, I am not. If we pass this law, you will have to use these pronouns, and the students in your classroom, he says, I will not. You cannot pass a law to force me to use pronouns that are not right. He says human beings decide the appropriate pronouns. And we have he for he and she for she, and those are the pronouns I am going to use. Amen. And well, what if a student comes up to you and asks you to use a special reference? He said, out of respect for a student, I may comply with what they request. If they respectfully request, I do not want to hurt feelings. He said, but I will not bow down to a government that wants to take over the role of society and order us to use pronouns that are not natural and normal. I won't do it. Boy, they tried to, do all kinds of things to suppress him, but his popularity on YouTube went through the roof. And he just went on a speaking tour through the United States, and I wanted to go to Denver and hear him. But Jordan Peterson, But I appreciate that role that he's doing. Here's a real advertisement that I saw. It was on a gender fluid t-shirt. And I think it said, there are no genders, or there are many genders, something like that. I've got it on my phone, but it's lost in like 5,000 pictures here. It would take a while to find it. But it says, there are many genders. And it's a sign on a t-shirt. It's like there are two genders. They cross out the two and they put many. And in the order blank below, it says men's or women's. Are we psycho or what? If that is not an apt description of where we are today, confused, I want that in a size medium gender fluid, please. And I'm not making fun of anybody that, because of abuse or psychological manipulation that has taken place in their life, has serious questions. I'm making fun of that. What I'm making fun of is a society that thinks it can dispense with God's ordering of things, and they're going to do a better job of it. For the people that are struggling with those issues, I have deep sympathy, and they deserve our help. But if we give in to the unnatural cravings of an unhealthy society, that's not good for them or for us. And I remember a young boy who was constantly in trouble because he just wouldn't behave. And his mother would go to the principal, would go to the teacher, would go to their preacher, would go to their coach and say, you just have to understand him. And at some point it dawned on me, no, I don't. He has to understand me. I'm the adult trying to function as a normal adult in a normal world. And he's trying to make and what she was trying to do is get everything from the baseball program to the school system to their church to function around the misbehavior of this boy instead of making the boy conform to the environments that he was in. When the coach is talking, sit there and be quiet, or you're going to stay on the bench. You're not going to get to play. If you're speaking in class, you're going to get a spanking and get sent to the principal's office and stay there all day. If you're in church and you're running around during worship, you're going to be made to sit in your pew. If you get up again and you shout out in worship, you're going to get a spanking. And see what happens? The boy learns what? I better behave. If you keep giving into dysfunction, eventually even the healthy become dysfunctional. And that doesn't help anybody. So how should the poor be treated? Number one, be kind. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. Proverbs 19:17. God is so pleased with those who serve the needs of the impoverished. He assumes the indebtedness of the poor toward the benefactors, and he pays the debt in full. In other words, how we treat the poor is how God regards we are treating him. Secondly, God is maker of both the rich and the poor. Proverbs 22:2. He is the creator and the defender of the unfortunate. Proverbs 19:17. So we regard both the rich and the poor as being equal in the eyes of God. God made them both. 3. Simply giving some people money is treating the symptoms rather than the underlying disease, and will enable the poor person to continue with his lack of self-discipline. In this case, the gift of money does more harm than good, and it would be better not to give anything if it's simply a handout. So, be kind to the poor. Regard both the poor and the rich equally as created in the eyes of God. One's not more important because he has nicer clothes than the one who has less quality clothes. But when it comes to giving, realize that giving money may simply be treating symptoms and not dealing with the underlying disease of lack of discipline, laziness, wanting to mooch off others. And if you simply give them food, or money, you're feeding them, and you're feeding their disease and making it worse. Now, I can't put this chart up there because it would take a bit of writing, and I would have put this on PowerPoint, but it's not on PowerPoint. But here's a chart, and I'll send this to you. And here's, by the way, my email and my cell phone. If you email or text, please send your name with it so I'll know who you are, and just put class notes. But causes and treatment of poverty. And there's several ways of treating someone that's in poverty. And it starts out with, if we believe the primary cause of poverty is, and there's several causes, then we will primarily try to, and then here's the solution we try to come up with. If we believe the primary cause of poverty is a lack of knowledge, they don't know how to manage money, for example, then we will try to educate them. Somebody that needs food may not be lazy. They may never have been trained. You think back several generations when many of you grew up on a farm. You grew up in the country, and you had to work growing up. You had to gather eggs, you had to milk a cow, you had to plant a garden. My dad grew up in a city, but they were on the lower, it was right after the Depression. My dad grew up learning how to walk the railroad tracks as a small boy, picking up the pieces of coal that fell off the coal cars and taking them home. He was taught how to sift through all the debris to get any chunks of coal that were big enough to continue to reuse. He was taken out with his father when he was still a little boy and used the little buckets to haul the cement that my grandfather used for his cement work. So even in a city, children were often taught the trade of their father or their mother. We don't do that as much today, do we? How beneficial it would be, even if it's just with buckets in the backyard, we teach our children what it is to plant a garden. They're learning some kind of trade, and they're learning that if I want this in 3 months, I've got to do this 3 months earlier. And they learn the process and they learn the patience. So we might have to educate people that come our way about that. If we believe the primary cause of poverty is these people have been oppressed by other powerful people, we will work for social justice. When you go home, look up on the internet the Gracchus or Gracchi brothers, Gracchi. Individually, I guess it's Gracchus, Gracchus. There were two brothers. They were born to a wealthy, land-owning Roman family in the Roman Empire days. They both volunteered, or at least the older brother volunteered to fight in the military. At the time, Rome had a policy, if you served in the military for so many years, when you left the military, they gave you a small plot of ground, just big enough to put a house on it, to have a wife, and to raise several kids, and to have enough land for a cow and a garden. That was their appreciation to you for your service to your country. Well, you could go into a neighborhood and see 30 or 40 plots right here, little farm plots of these retired soldiers. Some of the men, but when I say retired, they were still young enough to get married and have kids. And this is how the government paid them and thanked them. A lifetime of being able to produce and raise their own food. Well, some of the wealthy looked at that and said, I sure would, my property borders that property where those vets are. I sure would like that land for myself. And some of them got in power and they voted away that form of retirement for the Roman soldiers. So Roman soldiers would come home from 10 years of service, fighting in foreign lands, and they're just dropped off. There's no retirement program. There's no money. There's no place to live. And they became the homeless in the cities of Rome. Aren't you glad that didn't happen in our country? So the Gracchi brothers go off to serve, and they come back, and the oldest one, I forget his first name, maybe it was Tiberius. I've got a little radio spot about them that I can send to you if you write to me. A little radio program I did on them. He comes home and he says, I served with that guy. Why is he homeless? I served with him. Why is he living in a street corner begging food? They're supposed to get a plot of ground and a place to build a house and grow a garden so they can raise a family. What's going on? And he looked at the laws and he saw corrupt politicians that changed the laws. So he ran for public office so he could change the laws and give the land rights back to the veterans. He was murdered. His brother saw what happened. He ran for public office to push for land reform. He was chased by a mob, and rather than fall into their hands, he committed suicide. as he was being chased down the street. Their mother survived. And she said, I've lost my husband, I've lost my sons, but I will live out my days knowing that I lived in a house with men of character. Very stirring story. Their story stirred the community enough that other honest politicians got land reform at least restored for a while, and veterans were given their land to raise their families. That's what a society does that cares about its people. It didn't raise the food for them, but it gave them the land and provided land where they could do it. That is real social justice. It's not just giving people things because they demand them and they think they deserve more. It's not just, I've moved into your community, I'm new here, I have nothing, take care of me, and then giving me stuff. That's not social justice. That's just throwing money at a problem to create a bigger problem in the future, when I then have 5 kids and I demand you take care of me 5 times over, because now I've got 5 kids. See? So social justice is working for people to have opportunity, and the Gracchus brothers, the best story I know of how that's happened. If we think that the reason for poverty is the personal sins of the poor, then we will evangelize and discipline them. If I'm spending all my money on illegal drugs, and that's why I don't have money to eat, if you give me money, I may spend it on food, but I may go spend it on some more illegal drugs. If you give me the food, I may eat the food, and then when my next check comes in, I'm going to spend that on drugs because I don't need to spend it on food because you gave me food. In that case, we have to evangelize and disciple and teach them right from wrong. And finally, if we believe that their reason for poverty is a lack of material resources, then we may give them material resources. Here's 4 reasons that someone's in poverty, and only one of them suggests that we give them something. And that would be for a temporary duration at that, until they can be in a place where they can work. The responsibility of the spiritual leaders toward the poor is to be aware and concerned. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. Proverbs 29:7. And in the Royal Proverbs, there's a number of references to seeing that the poor are given a fair treatment. Number 2 is to provide help according to the reason we believe these people are in poverty. So number 1, be aware and concerned. Number 2, provide the help that is required, whether it's education, whether it's evangelizing, whether it's social justice, or whether it's giving them some food. The Bible does not provide for all the ways that we are supposed to help. In other words, it doesn't say if it's this kind of a reason for poverty, you do this. The Bible does say help, though. The Bible says be aware, and we help in ways that are necessary. The implications of effective ministry to those who are marginalized, whether they're poor, whether they're of a different language group, whatever it is that has them out on the margins, the implications of effective ministry to them is, number 1, we fulfill God's concerns. We can fill God's concerns. Matthew 25:31 following shows God's concerns for those that don't have a coat, for those that don't have food, for those that are in prison. Right? That's the separating of the sheep and the goats. Number 2, the implications of effective ministry is that when we act like God toward those who are impoverished, toward those who are marginalized, is indication that God's kingdom is being built. One of the things God promised in the Old Testament, if you remember even last night we talked about the banquet table, that God's going to provide the food. When there is abundance for all people, when there's opportunity for people, it shows God's kingdom is working the way He wants it to work. So as we show interest in the poor, not just giving money, but in spending time with them and talking to them and visiting with them and helping them in ways that we can with, say, education, then God's kingdom work is being fulfilled. Our concern for the poor among us, to me, is indicated by a man named Craig Satterley, who is a minister for, I think, an Episcopalian church. He's a blind preacher. But he's very, very smart. He's written some very, very good books, some books on how the Spirit works in the church today. Craig Satterley had said on Sunday morning at their church, they have coffee, they have a coffee bar, and then they'll put some cookies out for people to have just a snack in between Bible class and worship. And they had some small children that they noticed would eat their cookie, but they would also grab other cookies and stick them in their pocket. And there was one lady who saw the children stealing the cookies, and she kind of yelled at the kids. And it came back to Craig about this woman yelling at the children, stealing cookies. So he met with the children and said, kids, we have plenty of cookies here. You can eat all you want. Why are you stealing them and putting them in your pocket? And they said, because we have little brother and sister at home that don't have any cookies, and we don't have any money for cookies, so we're taking them for them. And Craig got to know the family and got to meet with the family and found out this children's story was true. And he talked to the other lady at the church and said, you know, they're taking the cookies because their siblings at home don't have them. What if we just let the kids have the cookies? They're not stealing them. And he raised the question, what kind of children steal food? And he said, hungry children. And if we gave hungry children food, they wouldn't have to steal it. And my daughter worked with a church in Little Rock for a while that had a ministry once a month to the homeless, and they would take food down to the bridge and they'd have a worship service. And there might be 15 or 20 showed up for the worship service. And when it was over and they said, okay, the tables are set up for the food distribution, they had 40 and 50 show up. And she saw one man grab the sandwich and stuck it in his pocket. And she said, sir, we have plenty of sandwiches. They're all yours. You can't steal the sandwich because we are giving it to you. That sandwich is yours. You can have it. And he just smiled. So the implications of helping the poor in ways that are appropriate is we function like God in their lives. And that's an important part of being a leader in the community today. Anything before we close? Most of this class was on aside stuff, so I hope that was beneficial. Thank you for your comments.